god, the founder father of a nation, a man of mythic deeds. Well, what does Jehovah say? He says in the Bible, you shall have no other God but me. And those Bible scribes have to make damn sure that Abraham is never allowed any of the attributes of any sort of a God at all. So he appears as Mr. Heavy Normal, Mr. Heavy Normal Shepherd, Mr. Banality. And that's what gives Genesis this extraordinary tension. It's a tension between myth on one side and the most ordinary thing on the other. I tell you something else too. You try and fix Abraham down in history, and he and his family will pick up their tents and they'll steal away over horizons that go on for thousands and thousands of years.
That's about as far as you'll get, looking for Abraham with a spade and a map. And yet, you know, you can't work for very long in the East, even in an age of motor cars and televisions, without feeling close to people like Abraham. They seem to be just out of reach, in the air, in the dust. It might not rate high on an archaeological list of candidates for the biblical city of Ur, but the city of Urfa, quite close to ancient Haran, has a lot of Abram's world in it. Something, too, that's more important than bricks and stones. Muslims who live here believe that their city is the city of Ur from which Abraham started his travels. They say that Abraham was born here in a cave, which is now a holy place with a holy spring of water. Abraham is counted as a prophet in Islam, the first man to proclaim that there is but one God. At Urfa, they say, he attacked the statues of the gods of the sun and the moon, that a wicked king imprisoned him and tried to burn him on a fire. But then, miraculously, the flaming logs of wood all turned to fine fat fish. The descendants of these fish still swim on at Urfa in these great ponds, fed by the waters of Abraham's holy spring. The fish ponds are the heart of the city. Everyone walks here in the evenings, admiring the fine fish. And God help you if you should kill one. These fish are still sacred, just as they have been for thousands upon thousands of years. Before the Muslims, there were the Christians here at Urfa. Before the Christians, Greeks, when the fish's fins were decorated with golden jewelry. Before the Greeks, there were the ancient Mesopotamians, when the fish swam about in honor of the moon god. So think about it for a minute, what you've got here. You've got this pool of sacredness. And the religions that have come and gone through the ages, they're sort of decorations to something much deeper. It's a sort of human awareness of sacredness that is here. And the theology is just, different expressions of that basic idea. That is Abraham's world. That feeling that underneath everything in the world there is a sacredness. It's not a stupid world, it's not a daft world, it's not what idiots believe in. It's what the human race has made. It's one of the things that makes it different from the animals. It's a very important aspect. If you don't understand that, you will not understand the Bible and its beginnings. Look, before you had orthodox religion as we know it today, I think the most ancient religions, you might say, were invented really by poets and artists. People came to places like Urfa and felt there was something sacred here. Artists made statues of gods, poets wrote hymns for them, and the priests organized the cult. If everybody felt that those statues, those hymns, or even these fish embodied something of the sacred, the god became a success, and he didn't, it just died out, and that was the end of it. Now, our Bible is a continuation of that, because what that is a definition of the sacred itself. You make a statue of a god, you're trying to define something of the quality of these fish in this marvelous pond.
And our Bible is the world's most elaborate conception of a definition of the understanding of God himself.
In ancient Mesopotamia, the world and all its gods was explained in sacred stories. These stories, of course, were myths. Myths, that is, not in the modern meaning of the word, as lies or falsehoods, but in the sense of a story that told of the underlying order of the world. Myths could explain the beauty of a spring or a fish, the mystery of a cave. They could explain your good fortune and your misfortune. They helped you feel secure, part of a sacred family, a universal order. Like all ancient people, Abraham would have seen his life in terms of myth. The people who made the Genesis creation story knew these old stories well. And they used some of them in their description of the beginning of the world. Like Abraham, the Bible's story of creation was born in ancient Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia was very fertile, bountiful even, but it also held random violence in it. For the Mesopotamians, life was precarious. Crops and cities were often parched or washed away by floods and violent storms. There was plague too, and tribesmen raiding down from the surrounding hills. The Mesopotamian myth of the creation gave order to uncertainty. Enuma Elish, the ancient priests recited to their people. Enuma Elish la nabu shammanu, when on high the heavens were not yet named. They went on to tell an ancient and terrifying story of a family feud. Of how one day the great mother goddess declared war on all 6 generations of her family because they were making too much noise. And then the gods appointed Marduk, a warrior of the 6th generation, as their champion. Marduk fought the mother goddess and her husband and her demon army on the great wide plain of Mesopotamia. And finally, he overcame them all. As for the mother goddess, he pushed the wild wind into her mouth, bloated her stomach, shot arrows into her, and Mesopotamia was born. With a butcher's knife, Marduk split the carcass of the mother goddess in half and made the sky and the earth. And from the arch of her thighs, he made the vault of heaven. Her head he buried under the northern mountains and pierced her eyes so that Mesopotamia's 2 great rivers would flow down her cheeks.
It's extraordinary to think of that terrible Mesopotamian mayhem. That terrifying story of creation is the same story that underlies that solitary, majestic creation of Jehovah in the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. It's the same story as that Mesopotamian murder. And that's important in a way. It's important not because you say, oh, well, fancy that, the book of Genesis is a rip-off of some Mesopotamian folk story. That's not the thing. It's important because through the Bible, that old Mesopotamian story has given the West. It's given the West a very particular model of the universe, of a certain sort of structure, of a single unit with stresses and strains in it, just like a family. Now, how these things work, how is it that the Mesopotamian story is buried in this first page of the book of Genesis? Well, you're not going to find some Mesopotamian god called Joe who ends up being Jehovah, who goes off and does a similar thing in Mesopotamia. The concordance between the 2 stories is one of structure and number.
Remember, there are 6 generations of Mesopotamian gods, just as Jehovah takes 6 days to make the universe. And in each day, Jehovah makes a part of the universe. He makes the sun, the stars, the silt, the animals, the plants, the birds. The Mesopotamian gods of each of those 6 generations are the gods of exactly the same things that Jehovah is making on each of his 6 days of creation. So underneath this text, if you like, there live the Mesopotamian gods. Look, just start on the first day. God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. The waters below ground and above ground, salt water and fresh water. The waters, incidentally, are the 2 rivers of Mesopotamia going into the Persian Gulf. Mesopotamia going on here, but that is the gods of the first generation. The great mother goddess was the god of the salt water. Her husband was the god of the fresh water. They're the first generation gods. That's what he's making on the first day. And you can go like that, second generation, second day, third generation, third day, fourth generation. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He's making the sun and the moon. What are the gods of the 4th generation of Mesopotamian gods? They're the gods of the heavens, of the sun, the moon, and the stars. And he made the stars also, the book of Genesis tells us, on the 4th day. And that correspondence goes right down through the list until you come to the 6th day. Now, what happens on the 6th day? Marduk, of the 6th generation of gods, makes man so that the other gods can rest. The other gods are building Marduk a temple. It's become so splendiferous, they're going to build the guy a temple. So Marduk takes pity on them and all and says, right, I'll make you a man a slave so that you can all rest. What does Jehovah do? He makes man on the 6th day, and then Jehovah takes the rest. The difference is with the sort of man that's being made. Marduk makes man to be a slave. Jehovah, though, makes man in his own image. Man is given responsibility. It's as if the people who wrote Genesis are saying, yes, we understand your world, Mesopotamia. We absolutely believe in the way you priests have divided up the whole order of the universe. You're good scientists, but you're lousy moralists. We want a different role for men. That means, too, they wanted a different role for God. So the God of Genesis isn't a Mesopotamian God. Where did he come from? Well, think of Abraham again. He's going on his intellectual journey. He's starting in Mesopotamia and he's going to Egypt. And the Jehovah of Genesis is not so much like the gods of Mesopotamia, but far more like the gods of Egypt.